So it looks like Donald Trump wants to put an end to military intelligence and economic support to Ukraine. Therefore, military supplies become a crucial issue that European leaders will have to discuss tomorrow in London regarding the ongoing clash between Zelensky and Trump, as well as the broader topic of armaments. Marco Travaglio tells us more.
Let's put ourselves in the shoes of an arms dealer, huh? Until the other day, he was anxious because he thought if Trump and Putin make peace in Ukraine, it's trouble. Then Zelensky showed up at the White House asking for air defense, which is basically the old no-fly zone that even Biden hadn't granted him in exchange for his kind participation in the negotiation. Basically, he was asking for World War III to make peace. And it ended the way it ended, with Zelensky ultimately getting kicked out of the White House by the two bullies, Trump and Vance. Everything has to be redone. So is there still any hope left for our arms dealer, who is absolutely terrified at the mere idea that peace might break out? Arms dealers live a hellish life. You don't know it, but it's like that, always swinging between highs and lows, between anxieties and satisfactions. Since 2022, when the second round of the war in Ukraine broke out, the global military industry has been doing great, doubling, tripling profits. 3 years of fabulous profits. Think about it. In 2024, the revenues of the 5 largest American arms groups exceeded $200 billion. They hadn't done so well since the early 2000s, when the United States of America was founded. They invaded Afghanistan in 2 years and then Iraq, and stayed there for 20 years, causing almost 1.5 million deaths, but above all, making their military industries earn fabulous amounts. Then came the cold shower. Trump won the elections in November, and that was particularly infamous for the arms factories, especially because he had already ended the war in Afghanistan by the end of his first term in office. And another cold shower, he said, as he just won the recent elections. No more wars, at least in the West, starting with Ukraine. Yet enough is enough. There are still 55 wars left being fought between the continents of Africa and Asia. And he also announced that he will spend less on defense, cutting the military budget from Biden's $920 billion in 2024 to $850 billion in 2025, with NATO plans, which until the other day were preparing for the final war against Russia and then China. We could say he uses it to clean his hair, because Putin is no longer the enemy for him. Indeed, for him, he is a commercial partner to detach from China and bring back to the Western European sphere. China is a commercial enemy, so do not enlist him. So just to let you know, there will be no wars over Taiwan. And if Russia and China come to an agreement, Trump mentioned that the 3 superpowers could potentially have their military spending together. Think what a disaster for our arms dealer. And now what do? No worries, Europe will take care of it, which instead wants to at least double military spending. And why? No, because Trump told us that if we want to send soldiers to Ukraine to guarantee its future security, we have to pay for them ourselves, but at our own expense. He told us he wouldn't send a single American soldier. He said if Europe wants to stay an enemy of Russia, it's free to do so. But it has to pay for its defense by increasing military spending from the current European average of 1.9% to 5% of GDP. Just to give you an idea, for Italy alone, that would mean spending $114 billion a year instead of the current $32 billion, almost quadrupling it. And not only if we want to save ourselves from his tariffs, which he threatens to set at 25%, we have to buy weapons from the Americans and from them. We also have to buy gas from them, which we already buy, costing us 4 times as much as Russian gas. And we also have to regasify it because it arrives in liquid form, polluting us even more frequently. It also comes from Russia through triangulations that the Americans pretend not to see. Astonishment and scandal. But does this Trump really look out for American interests? Yeah, right. Because Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Biden, whose interests were they really looking out for? Ours, the Europeans. The only difference is that the others pretended to be our friends and ruined us with a smile. Then we found out what they really thought of us quite by chance. It happened when Victoria Nuland, who was Obama's and Biden's envoy to Ukraine, was meddling to destabilize the country and start the civil war. She got caught on the phone with the American ambassador to the UN, saying, "Fuck the EU." This incident revealed that this dismissive attitude has always been the American stance towards us.
So now Trump is telling us things brutally, bluntly, and clearly. At least he's not fake and he's not a hypocrite. Let's say he's a Biden without any softening there. But it's not like we absolutely have to obey him. The Americans voted for him, so they have to deal with him. Maybe it works out because he serves their interests. But we didn't vote for Trump, so we don't owe him anything. However, it's not from him that we should expect to act in our best interests. Rather, it's from our European leaders that we should demand such actions. The problem we face is that our leaders are like dwarfs. They're like little kids who are always clinging to Mother America. They can't seem to let go or break free from this Euro-Atlanticism spell that has been over for decades now. It was already clear before that European interests are opposed to American ones, but now that he's telling us no, that we're not even pretending to be allies anymore, well, let's wake up, stop serving American interests, and start serving our own, right? At least for that part of our destiny that depends on us and not on the Americans. Well, let's take that back, right? Let's use Trump when it suits us best, especially if he can stop starting wars around the world. Additionally, if he can stop putting us against the Russians, considering they're right next door, it would be beneficial. Bring Russia back into the fold of partners and no longer consider them as enemies. All the better for us too. Let's take advantage if a new Yalta or a new Helsinki conference is born, with a new multipolar world order divided into zones of influence where the great powers no longer fight with missiles and armies. But in the economy, we also have everything to gain there because Europe, if it acts with one voice thinking of itself instead of others, is also a power, right? For the rest, let's give Trump a taste of his own medicine if he messes with us. Let's respond in kind. He slaps on tariffs and we take away the cars. Sanctions on Russia hurt us more than they hurt Putin. Let's begin purchasing Russian gas once more. It's more affordable and of higher quality. Let's cut down the bills and give some breathing room to our businesses and families. Let's get the Nord Stream pipelines back up and running, the ones bombed and destroyed by our so-called Ukrainian allies. Let's reopen to the Russian market and then make trade deals with the BRICS, who now make up about 41% of the world's GDP, starting with China. Let's revive the Silk Road that Maloney quickly shut down just to get a pat on the head from Biden. And then let's pump public investments into supporting our productive industries, not weapons, starting with the automotive sector. Our welfare. The only response Trump understands in his power-based language is the one from old Pertini, fight fire with fire. That's how you serve European interest. So have you heard any European leader talk like this, say these things that are just plain common sense? Because they're common sense, no one says them. While Trump speaks in the manner of a businessman, what we refer to as the European Union continues to discuss weapons and soldiers, what to do with it. Nobody knows. About Ukraine, European leaders still won't admit that we lost the war and keep acting like we won. They set conditions hanging on every word of a political corpse like poor Zelensky, who even got kicked out of the White House. They yell because Trump is dealing with the winner, which is Putin, over the heads of the losers. But if you lose a war, you don't have the power to set the terms. You can only endure the consequences and beg for mercy. In fact, after yesterday's show, Zelensky has already backed down today and announced that he will go to Canossa to sign the humiliating agreement on rare earths. Maybe Trump will throw in a few more strangling clauses in the meantime, because that's really what this is all about, right? Ukraine has to get robbed by the Americans as well after already being robbed by the Russians. Sure, it would have been nicer to have a balanced, fair negotiating table with everyone in their place, including Zelensky and the European Union representatives. Europe had a full 3 years to set up that table, but instead they did absolutely nothing and left the diplomatic initiative to scoundrels like Erdogan and Xi Jinping. Bin Salman allowed the Pope to preach in the desert, which was quite an unprecedented event. He also kicked Scholz and Orban out because they dared to reach out to Putin, showing his firm stance on the matter. Additionally, He messed up the Istanbul talks in 2022 that could have potentially ended the war just a month after Russia invaded. A significant missed opportunity for peace. And now Europe can't really complain if the negotiations are being handled by Trump and Putin without Kiev and without the Europeans. On the other hand, while we protest against the peace negotiations, the European Union imposes new sanctions on Russia and sends more weapons to Kiev to prolong the war even further. And it leaves the right-wing leaders with the exclusive claim to the word peace. No, the last European Parliament resolution was just a month ago. It says that Ukraine needs a full military victory over Russia and also a democratic change in Russia and other authoritarian countries like Belarus. Hey, sweetheart, as they say in Rome. No, just the other day, European countries at the UN General Assembly voted for a resolution that preaches wonderful things, unity and territorial integrity of Ukraine. Then the Security Council rejected the resolution because the Americans voted against it. This time, along with the Russians and the Chinese, France and Great Britain, to play it safe, abstained. No, it's madness, this Euro delirium. No, because it could also happen in the future that Trump, Putin, and Zelensky, under significant pressure, sign a truce and subsequently a peace agreement, while von der Leyen, Callas, and other Euro-demented individuals protest vehemently because peace has unexpectedly broken out. Not only that, Trump has just repeated to Zelensky that NATO is out of the question, while Meloni, as if nothing happened, continues to talk about Ukraine in NATO, and the European Union has never revoked the resolution from last July 17. And it was said that Ukraine's entry into NATO is a wonderful and irreversible process, with votes in favor from the PPE, Liberals, Greens, and part of the Conservatives, including Brothers of Italy, PD, and Forza Italia, while only the five-star movement Lega and IABS were opposed, all to avoid ever telling the truth to Europeans and Ukrainians. Now, what sense does it make to continue to delude the Ukrainian people that they will achieve complete victory over Russia? They will maintain territorial integrity, that is, the 4 regions they lost plus Crimea, which makes 5, will enter NATO irreversibly, when everyone knows these are all bedtime stories. This is not helping Zelensky and the Ukrainians. This is preparing the Ukrainians to revolt against Zelensky when it is written in black and white that they lost the war, that they will never see most of the occupied territories again, and that NATO is out of the question. But even entry into the European Union is very risky. Why? Because it has insane costs for both Ukraine and the European Union. So the European Union, if it were up to it, would continue the war indefinitely just to avoid admitting it had lost, by getting thousands more Ukrainians killed, ruining our economy a bit more. No, it's TSO logic if you think about it, because at the same time in Europe, they are already fighting over Macron's great idea of sending troops to Ukraine. Peacekeeping troops to a place where there isn't even a truce yet, and the war is still ongoing, right? And the other great idea is to send weapons to a place where a peace agreement is about to be made. The weapons that will remain in the hands of those Nazi and ultra-nationalist militias who do not want peace will continue to be used by them even after the ceasefire. These militias will use the weapons against us, who will be sending peacekeeping troops to the region, so in the end with our weapons they will end up shooting at our own soldiers. Then you will understand that we are beyond the point of TSO. The other idea is to hastily create a European army by significantly raising military spending from the current European average of 1.9% of GDP to 3% or even 3.3% of GDP without adhering to the budget constraints imposed by the Stability Pact. Why does the bomb melt? Naturally, she said, for healthcare, for schools, and for the welfare state, austerity always applies, so not a euro more is spent. But if you want to buy weapons, there are no more constraints. No, she granted us mercy, now the execution. The European Center is a beautiful idea, not even new, as the founding fathers of Europe, de Gasperi, Schuman, and Adenauer, already talked about it. Only that before the European army, a federal or confederal European state is needed, which then gives itself a foreign policy and then oversees it with a single army. Instead, these people think of starting from the end, from the army, beginning with the roofs of the building without securing the foundations, and are already putting the money together. Be careful, because obviously they are taking it from our pockets. They are thinking of a common debt with Eurobonds for a military PNRR of 7,800 billion a year. No, so it's all debt, MS money, rearmament bank, and a variety of other follies. Eurobonds, but not really Eurobonds. Even Schlein said it last week regarding agreements and disagreements. Now Schlein talks like Guerini, like Gentiloni, to the point where you wonder why they didn't just keep Letta, who had the same views. Maloney said it. Maloney wants to increase Italy's military spending to 2.3% of GDP. Right now, with 1.5%, we spend $32 billion a year on weapons. In the future, according to Maloney's plan, we should spend $57 billion, which is $25 billion more, without knowing where to find them, considering that $25 billion is already part of the last financial law. Germany can already do the same with an additional $200 billion for rearmament. Great Britain, Starmer, who is considered another genius, mentioned that we need to cut welfare in order to buy more weapons and recruit more soldiers. With the abolition of citizenship income, we finally have belligerence income. People are hungry. Let them eat cannons. It's the new Marie Antoinette version. Then if anti-European and neo-Nazi parties rise, it's always Putin's hackers' fault. And then either one sanctions. It's not the people who voted for them, like in Georgia. Either elections are abolished and the favored candidate is arrested, as happened in Romania, or there's a revolt that continues until the candidate we want wins. Meanwhile, we bleed ourselves dry and go into more debt with future generations. Because it's today's young people, today's children, that we are indebting to buy more weapons and maintain more soldiers. Since the war has ruined us all, we continue to insist and focus on war. But you never know. Maybe in the long run it'll bring good, right? Einstein already said it is typical of fools to always do the same thing and expect different results. But then this time, who should we do it to? The war with all these weapons, these additional soldiers. To the usual Russia, of course, which is already making agreements with the Americans, but we pretend not to notice, right? Like the last Japanese soldiers, we are still there with our little rifles, raising alarms about upcoming Russian invasions in Europe that have no sense or reason. In the past 30 years, it was not Russia that expanded westward, rather it was NATO that expanded eastward. Moscow has no need or desire for new territories. Why? Because it already has the largest country in the world, it's rich in natural resources, and it needs inhabitants because it's oversized. It's underpopulated. Then it knows that attacking a European Union country means attacking the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, facing 32 North Atlantic Treaty Organization armies, so it certainly couldn't handle it. But above all, it has even less interest in attacking us today than yesterday. Why? Because the New World Order is being born based on the Trump-Putin axis. But why should Putin attack countries that already hate him? And as a result, he wouldn't be able to keep under his control. But we have these last Japanese who don't listen and are determined to rearm in anticipation of a phantom Russian invasion in Europe. And the new dogma of European single thought is that the European Union takes too little compared to Russia and must at least balance the accounts. The other day, the British think tank International Institute of Strategic Studies reiterated it, and it was picked up without a shred of verification by the major global press, such as the Financial Times and Politico. The major Italian newspapers, of course, report that the LISS is funded by the defense industries. And indeed, guess what? The data it provides are completely false. It's a bit like the times of the Cold War, right? When it mattered with the chill of Italy. It's like during the Cold War when we inflated the Soviet Empire. Why justify that Europe filled itself with Euro missiles, bled itself dry at the expense of the people, and the people didn't take up pitchforks against those who made those crazy decisions? Then it was discovered that the Soviet Empire was a paper tiger that crumbled in one day under the rubble of the Berlin Wall. No, the false data from this IIS were debunked by the Public Accounts Observatory of the Catholic University of Milan, led by Carlo Cottarelli, who demonstrated with evidence that the claim of Moscow surpassing Europe is fake news. At purchasing power parity, European military spending in 2024 will be $730 billion, and Russian spending will be $462 billion. So we ended up spending 58% more than Putin did. Do we want to exclude European countries that are not part of the European Union? Perfect, we are still ahead. In the last year, the 27 European Union, EU countries collectively spent a total of $574.5 billion, which is significantly higher compared to Russia's expenditure of 462 billion, so we are still above by 18.6%, and Russia has been at war for 3 years, and Russia has to maintain the largest army in the world, the largest nuclear arsenal on the planet, says Cottarelli. Going to 3% of GDP like NATO wants is basically a 50% increase, and we already spend way too much. Should we spend less? It's better, considering that today we maintain 27 armies with weapons that don't even communicate with each other. Did you know we have 17 types of tanks in Europe, while the Americans have just one? We have 20 types of fighter bombers, the Americans have only 6, and so on. Yet when Cottarelli asked the newspapers to correct that false info, they either flat out refused or didn't respond at all and kept lying. This is Natalie Tocci in the press. Today, Moscow spends more on defense than the entire continent combined. False. Molinari in Republica. Significantly increased military spending. False. The press reports that Russia spends 416 billion, while Europeans spend 338 billion, which is actually half of the real figure. Completely false. These are the very same newspapers that then whine and complain when Zuckerberg removes fact-checking and shout every 2 seconds about social media fake news as if they don't produce fake news themselves and wave the banner of science as a flag against flat earthers. But today the conspiracists are the flat earthers scattered throughout the mainstream press. The funny thing is they think European rearmament is to spite Trump, but it's exactly what Trump wants. We buy more weapons so he can spend less, our economies keep bleeding, and his military industries, which he cuts funds to, will make a fortune with ours. Economies, right? Because most of the military industry is in America. In fact, today, 80% of the weapons Europe buys come from American giants. The same goes for sanctions against Russia. Trump is gradually lifting them, and instead of taking advantage and doing the same, we keep them and even add new ones. And we have already made a promise that we will never ask Russia for gas again. Instead, we will continue to get it from the Americans, even if it means paying 4 times as much. The United States is about to be tricked. It's the United States that are tricking Europe. Only Trump knows it. We don't. Our dwarfs say it plainly and clearly. They go to Trump. You've seen them, right? Everyone is bending over backwards. First for Starmer and then later for Macron. And we'll see the next ones coming to Trump, practically begging him for a little discount on tariffs. In return, they will promise to buy more weapons from him and more gas from him, ensuring that they stay in his good graces. That is, to avoid getting screwed by Trump, we anticipate it and screw ourselves. Clever. In fact, the only ones celebrating all this are the arms manufacturers. Here is their Italian president, Giuseppe Cossiga, who is a legacy and the successor of Crosetto at the helm of IAD, the Federation of Italian Security Companies. For European defense, at least 400 billion is needed. And if he says so, in fact, Leonardo has made a 54% leap in the stock market in the last 6 months, like other European and non-European arms giants. And now let's put ourselves in the shoes of that arms dealer. No, he had a fit with all these bad threats of peace. No, he had identified with the motto of Full Metal Jacket. Do you remember it? It's a cruel world, son. You have to hold on until this peace craze passes. Losing a partner like America was a big mess. Luckily, America replaces Europe. Why? Because as long as there is war, there is hope. And as long as there is Europe, there is war.